Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a really challenging set of sources. It's kind of a triple header.
It really is.
We're going to connect these incredibly intense, dramatic warnings about, the end of the world with some very tough, very pragmatic rules about daily work.
And then ground it all in one person's life.
Exactly. And that person is the surprisingly influential St. Margaret of Scotland.
It's a profound exploration of perseverance, really.
Yeah.
All these sources line up with the 33rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, which is a time in the church calendar that traditionally focuses on the final things, the eschaton.
The end times.
The end times. So our mission today is to pull out some foundational insights on, how do you maintain faith? And crucially, how do you maintain order?
Both when the world seems to be ending and just when you're trying to get through the day.
That's it. The sources give us warnings, for sure, but they also offer a kind of blueprint for both spiritual and practical endurance.
Okay, a blueprint. I like that. So let's unpack this, and we have to start with some, genuinely terrifying imagery. This comes right from the prophet Malachi. He's painting a really clear picture of divine reckoning.
And it is not subtle. Malachi delivers this prediction using the most visceral image possible.
Right.
He says, point blank, the day is coming, burning like a furnace.
And you really have to visualize this. This isn't a slow, smoldering campfire. This is an industrial forge.
And the target is defined with such precision.
Mm-hmm.
Malachi says the arrogant and all evildoers, they're going to be treated like straw.
Right. Think about that. You throw straw into a forge.
It's just gone, instantaneous,
Yeah.
violent, complete. But
Yeah.
then the prophet goes even deeper, and this is the part that really stood out to me. It suggests a kind of permanent erasure.
Yes, permanence is the absolute key here, both theologically and, you could say, sociologically. When the source says the fire will leave neither root nor branch, it means something far beyond just simple destruction.
What does that mean exactly? Neither root nor branch. Well, think about what a root does. It provides grounding, sustenance, and a branch. A branch allows for fruit, for regeneration, for new life.
So to get rid of both
Is to make regrowth totally impossible.
Yeah.
Complete eradication. There's no coming back from that. For those who embody arrogance and evil, it's an absolute final erasure from the story.
Wow. That is utter finality, just terror. But then right after that, Malachi's prophecy it pivots. It becomes profoundly beautiful. He immediately shifts from that fiery annihilation to this phenomenal promise for those who fear my name.
It's a total visual whiplash. It moves instantly from the searing heat of the forge to the cool, restorative light of dawn.
Yeah.
The faithful, he says, they will have the Son of Justice rising for them. And the language here is so evocative. It talks about healing in his wings.
Healing in his wings. I love that phrase. It implies so much more than just not being burned.
It does. It implies protection, refuge, being sheltered. If you look at the nuance in the original language, it connects this idea of justice not just with punishment for the bad, but with this incredible sense of refuge for the good, like being gathered under the protective wings of a great bird.
So justice is restorative light. It's about lifting up and repairing those who endure, not just punishing those who do wrong.
It's the promise of being sheltered from that all-consuming fire.
And this theme, this idea of absolute destruction on one hand and ultimate preservation on the other, it gets picked up immediately by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. But he applies it to the material world.
That's right. He's standing there in Jerusalem, and you have to imagine the scene. People are they're awestruck by the temple.
And for good reason. From all the historical accounts, Herod's temple was a true wonder of the world. Massive, gleaming white stones, gold fittings everywhere. It was the symbol of permanence.
Of security, of civilization.
Of faith.
And right there, in front of it, Jesus delivers this incredibly stark, destabilizing prediction.
He says, "The days will come when not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down."
For the people hearing that, it would have been conceptually impossible, like someone today saying the oceans will dry up tomorrow. But the source analysis makes a great point here.
What's that?
By the time Luke wrote his gospel, many of his readers already knew this had come true.
Oh, right. The Romans, 70 AD.
Exactly. The temple had been leveled. So for them, it wasn't just a scary prophecy. It was proof. It powerfully reinforced Jesus' prophetic authority. The destruction was total, just like the root and branch promise from Malachi, but applied to human institutions.
So naturally the disciples press him. When? When is this going to happen? What's the sign?
And Jesus immediately shifts gears. He goes from predicting this huge physical destruction to issuing a psychological warning. The first danger isn't falling stones. It's deception.
He says the faithful must be careful not to be misled.
It's an immediate command. He knows the fear and chaos will create a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled by false prophets. People will come saying, I am he, or the time is near.
And the message is just, do not follow them.
Right. Because that kind of anxiety makes people so vulnerable to charlatans, to anyone who claims to have all the answers.
So the very first act of perseverance isn't about hiding or fighting. It's about discernment, about not panicking.
Precisely. But he does give them signs. Not to pinpoint the exact date, but to give them context, to prepare them. He lists these specific catastrophic events that have to happen before the final end.
Let's run through that list. It's a pretty frightening catalog of global upheaval.
It is. The sources list them clearly. First, wars and riots. Nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom.
Standard human history, sadly.
Then come the disasters. Great earthquakes, plagues. The source uses the term onduk, which suggests severe, fast-spreading epidemic diseases.
Like a pandemic.
Exactly. And famines, widespread hunger. And then finally, terrible things and great signs from heaven. These are huge, visible disruptions to the natural order.
So we have this intense list of signs. But here's the crucial insight that the source material really stresses, and it connects this ancient passage to our reality today.
The one.
These signs, war, famine, disease, natural disasters, they are unfortunately common to every single age of human history.
They are the background noise of a world in decline.
Exactly. They are the birth pangs, as it's sometimes described. But they are not specific enough to determine the exact timing. They are signals that the end is approaching, but they are not the final bell itself.
That is the critical distinction.
Yeah.
Jesus gives them the signs so that when these things happen, you don't panic and follow the first charismatic leader who claims to be the Christ.
You're supposed to recognize them as part of the process.
Yes, as inevitable components of the end times, which means you must continue your work. You don't just stop everything and wait.
And that really sets up our major question for the day. If the future is both this fire and this healing, destruction, and warning, and we can't pin down the timing, how do we live through the messy, painful middle?
Which brings us to a much more personal and I think much more painful prediction about the immediate lives of the disciples.
Right. This is where it gets very real for them.
This is where the narrative shifts dramatically. Luke's gospel moves very deliberately from these huge global events, the temple falling, nations at war, to the deep personal suffering of the faithful.
So when all that chaos is happening out there, what's life going to be like for the disciples themselves?
Well, Jesus gives them a guarantee. Persecution. It's not an if, it's a when.
It's an absolute certainty.
Absolutely. And he details exactly where it will happen. They'll be arrested, persecuted, delivered to synagogues, to prisons. They'll be brought before kings, governors, all the authorities. For the sake of my name, it's a roadmap of suffering that goes right through the halls of power.
But then, just as quickly, he reframes it. The suffering isn't the point. It's an opportunity.
A shocking reframing. He says, this will be a time for you to bear witness.
So the moment of your greatest vulnerability, when you're on trial for your life, that becomes your biggest platform.
The trial itself becomes the most important sermon they will ever preach. And Jesus even addresses that natural anxiety. What am I going to say? How do I defend myself?
Right, the need to prepare your legal defense.
He tells them not to worry about it. Don't prepare your defense beforehand.
That requires just a radical amount of trust, especially with your life on the line. What's the promise that replaces that preparation?
The promise is supernatural. Jesus himself says he will give them a mouth and wisdom. The source uses this wonderful phrase, "miengluiva con gomwen," which means both eloquence and a kind of deep spiritual insight.
So it's not about being a clever lawyer.
No, their adversaries, with all their power and legal training, won't be able to contradict or resist it. The source analysis links this directly to the work of the Holy Spirit. Their defense won't be human cleverness. It will be divine truth speaking through them.
Okay, but we can't ignore the part that comes next. Before we imagine all the disciples being saved by this magical eloquence, Jesus delivers what has to be the most painful prediction of all.
This is the one that cuts to the core.
It's about betrayal.
This is the internal rupture. It's far more devastating than being arrested by a soldier. It's when the authorities are your own family.
Parents, brothers, relatives, and friends will hand you over. That's the ultimate betrayal of trust. And he doesn't sugarcoat it. He says some of them will be killed.
The consequence is total isolation. You will be hated by everyone because of my name.
Yeah.
And the source analysis really brings this home.
How so?
It notes that this extreme hatred has been proven true over and over for 2,000 years of church history. In places where faith has been actively suppressed, this isn't some abstract theory, it's historical reality. It anchors the whole prophecy in real, enduring suffering.
And now we get to the great paradox. This is where the interpretation becomes so critical. We've just established that disciples will be betrayed, hated, and some will be killed.
No question.
And yet, in the very next breath, Jesus says, "Not a hair of your head will perish." So, how do we reconcile that? How can you guarantee death and ultimate protection at the same time? If people are dying, hasn't the promise failed?
That is the crucial question, and it requires stepping back from a purely literal interpretation. If you're standing before a Roman governor, you want to know your body is safe. Jesus seems to guarantee that safety while also predicting your execution. It seems like a contradiction.
So what's the answer? How is martyrdom a form of protection?
The protection he's guaranteeing is eternal. The phrase, "not a hair of your head will perish," is symbolic language. It represents this most sacred protection for the inner person, for the soul.
So whatever happens to the physical body is secondary.
Exactly. For those who endure persecution for his name, their eternal salvation is guaranteed. Martyrdom isn't a failure of the promise, it's the ultimate fulfillment of it, because it secures the soul's entry into eternal life.
So the real battle is internal. It's not about surviving the physical trial, but about winning the spiritual one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why the final line is the whole point of the passage. By your perseverance, you will save your souls. Perseverance enduring to the end is the condition. It shifts the entire focus from trying to control the external world.
The wars, the kings, the falling temple.
Yeah, to controlling your internal spirit.
And the source analysis drives this home with a really powerful reflection on true martyrs. It says they die without bitterness or resentment.
Yes, that they show love and forgiveness, which is the key to conquering hatred.
But let me push back on that for a second. Is it really realistic to suggest a true martyr dies without any bitterness? I mean, isn't that setting an almost impossibly high bar for someone who's being tortured and killed?
It is setting the ultimate standard of virtue, no doubt. It requires a level of spiritual discipline that absolutely transcends our human instinct for self-preservation or revenge. But that's precisely the point. That demonstration of love in the face of death is what validates the entire testimony. If you die consumed by anger or fear or resentment, your soul is lost to those forces. But if you can die in peace and forgiveness, the soul is preserved. That is the highest form of perseverance.
So that's the theological demand, perseverance during catastrophe. But now we have to move to the practical demand, which is perseverance in daily life. Because when people are overwhelmed by the thought of the apocalypse or persecution, they freeze.
That is a perfect transition. Because if you can't control the global chaos that Jesus just described, what can you control? And Paul's answer is simple. You can control your own hands and feet. Spiritual paralysis often leads to physical paralysis, to idleness.
And doing nothing is also a failure of perseverance.
The huge failure.
Okay, so let's pivot completely. Let's go to the ultimate pragmatist, St. Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians. He just grounds this entire conversation with a really stern, really famous mandate about daily labor.
He delivers what he calls his iron rule, and it is brutally direct. He says, if anyone is unwilling to work, let him not eat.
No ambiguity there.
None. And it's important to note, he isn't talking about charity for the genuinely sick or unable to work. He's talking about the conscious choice to be idle.
So what was the specific problem he was addressing in Thessalonica? Why was he so severe about this?
Well, what's fascinating is that the problem was theological. It was the expectation of the parousia, the imminent return of Christ. Many of the early Christians there heard these apocalyptic warnings, like the ones in Luke, and basically decided to stop working. They thought, why bother planting crops if the world is ending next week?
That theological belief created a massive social disorder.
It created chaos. And you could almost challenge Paul on this, right? I mean, Malachi promises this incredibly gracious healing in his wings, but Paul's rule sounds so harsh. It almost seems to lack that grace.
Is it a contradiction in the source material?
I don't think it's a contradiction. It's a necessary application of justice. And Paul immediately models what he means by pointing to his own behavior.
Right. He practiced what he preached. He says he and his companions weren't idle, and they didn't eat anyone's food without paying for it.
He says they worked laboriously and tirelessly day and night to avoid being a burden on anyone. And crucially, he says they did this not because they lacked the right to be supported as apostles, they could have claimed that, but they did it to set an example for you to imitate.
The example was the message. Faith has to result in diligent, self-sufficient work.
Exactly. And now we get to this specific complaint, the twin evil of idleness. It's not just that these people weren't working.
There's more to it.
Paul says, "We hear that some among you are living in idleness, doing no work, but rather interfering in everything." The source uses a great phrase for this, "Deimin vao moiviek." It captures this sense of meddling, of becoming a busybody.
The lazy person is rarely passive. They're often actively disruptive. They aren't contributing, so they start inserting themselves into everyone else's business, creating gossip, confusion, social friction.
It's such a powerful psychological insight. Inactivity breeds social disruption. So Paul's call for order and self-sufficiency is the remedy.
So what is the practical advice? What's the opposite of being a meddling busybody?
He tells them to work quietly and eat their own food. The solution is productive, quiet contribution. Mind your own business, earn your own keep, and stop stirring up trouble. It's a blueprint for social order, especially under theological stress.
So we've gone from global prophecy to personal suffering, and now to the ethics of daily labor. And now we pivot one last time to a historical figure who seems to have embodied all of these things: perseverance, fierce devotion, and relentless productive work, all while wearing a crown.
St. Margaret of Scotland.
St. Margaret, her story is exceptional. She took all these demanding spiritual principles we've been talking about and applied them directly to the seat of political power.
And she was a total outsider who transformed an entire kingdom through really sheer personal virtue.
Let's clarify her background first, because she wasn't Scottish at all.
Not even a little bit. She was born in exile. Her mother was a Hungarian princess, her father an Anglo-Saxon prince. She only ended up in Scotland because her family was shipwrecked there while fleeing from William the Conqueror's invasion of England.
A refugee who becomes a queen.
By marrying King Malcolm III. And we should say, Malcolm was not a refined man. The sources describe him as kind-hearted but crude and uncultured. A warrior king.
But this is her magnificent accomplishment, both politically and personally. She didn't try to rule through overt power. She used her moral authority and her love to tame him. She helped him transform from this rough warrior into a virtuous king.
She reformed the king through influence and example, turning the throne into a platform for justice. And her influence went way beyond just her husband's personality. She tackled huge systemic issues.
Especially in the church.
Yes, the church in Scotland at that time was pretty isolated and, frankly, poorly regulated. So she actively encouraged and organized councils to correct these deeply rooted religious abuses among the clergy.
What kind of abuses are we talking about?
She went after three big ones. First, simony, the buying and selling of church offices. Second, usury, charging insane interest rates that exploited the poor. And third, incest, which was more common than you'd think because of confusion about marriage laws in isolated regions.
So she was imposing a kind of Roman order and accountability on the Scottish church.
A massive feat of institutional perseverance. And beyond religion, she knew a just kingdom needed culture. So she promoted arts and education, funded churches, and brought a new level of refinement to the court.
But all that royal duty didn't stop her from this intense personal piety. Her life was a complete contradiction to her wealth and status.
Completely. She lived austerely. She prayed and read scripture for hours every day. She ate very little, slept very little, all to dedicate more time to her religious work. She was living Paul's ethic of working tirelessly, day and night, even though she didn't have to.
And this rigor extended to her family. She personally supervised the religious instruction for her 8 children. She knew she was raising the future rulers of Scotland.
And look at the extreme devotion she shared with her husband, King Malcolm. They observed 2 Lents.
2?
One before Easter, like normal, and an extra one before Christmas. They basically doubled their commitment to fasting and austerity. That's extraordinary for a reigning king and queen.
And their nighttime routine is maybe the most humbling detail of all.
Waking up around midnight to attend Mass. Every night, to think about the discipline that requires. For a king who's constantly traveling and fighting, and a queen with a huge family, it just shows where their priorities were.
She was a queen, but she operated like a servant. And her charity wasn't abstract. It was intensely personal and constant.
There are 2 examples that are just unforgettable.
The first is the daily ritual. On her way home from that midnight mass, she would routinely wash the feet of 6 poor people and give them alms.
The Queen of Scotland, on her knees, every single day. A direct echo of Christ's servant leadership.
And the second example is even more stringent. It was a rule she imposed on herself.
A strict rule. She would never sit down to eat until she had first personally provided food for 9 orphans and 24 poor people.
33 people every meal. Her own hunger was completely secondary to the needs of the most vulnerable in her kingdom.
She lived out that Malachi promise of justice, not by calling down fire, but by being that restorative healing light herself.
Her story has a tragic end, though.
It does. It concludes with heartbreaking circumstances in 1093. She died during a final illness, just 4 days after her husband, King Malcolm, and their eldest son were ambushed and killed in battle.
So she lived and died amidst the very chaos and betrayal that the gospel predicted. But she demonstrated that perseverance right until the very end.
If we just recap the major insights, we've navigated the fiery prophecies of Malachi and learned that destruction is absolute for the arrogant, but that healing light awaits the faithful.
We saw in Luke that persecution, if you face it with endurance, becomes an opportunity for your ultimate witness. It ensures your eternal salvation, even if your body perishes.
We understood Paul's vital lesson on quiet, productive labor as the way to maintain social order, especially when you're anxious about the future.
And then we saw all of these demanding principles lived out perfectly by St. Margaret of Scotland.
So let's connect this back to you, the listener, looking for this foundational knowledge on faith and order. I think we found that the core message spanning all of these sources, it's not about anxiously waiting for the end. That's what leads to idleness.
It's about relentless, virtuous action in the present.
The signs of the end are always present. The chaos is always rising. The true measure of faith is how you respond today, right now, in the messy middle.
And so, here's a final thought for you to explore as you move forward with this. Margaret, a queen, found her greatest sanctity not through ruling, not through leading armies, not through politics, but through washing feet and making sure the hungry were fed. Given Paul's explicit warning about the idle who interfere in everything, the busybodies, how might Margaret's commitment to quiet, focused acts of personal service be the ultimate antidote to both spiritual anxiety about the future and the social chaos caused by idleness?